G'day, it's Matt, and welcome to the December Relive Adelaide podcast. Well, what a year it's been. When I first began this project at the start of the year, the future of motor racing on the Adelaide street circuit was uncertain and, more worryingly, non-existent. I'm very happy that motor racing has returned, and it sure opens up a lot more content options, but it wasn't critical to what I originally had planned. Every time I head into the city and walk in Victoria Park or drive past Victoria Park, drive through the redeveloped Banana Bend on East Terrace before turning right onto Rundle Road, seeing the facade of the fruit and produce markets, the Stag Hotel on the corner and the brewery apartments, which tip their hat to the old brewery and malt towers which used to be there on site. Well, I don't need to go on, you get the idea. The track is still there, and that's what Relive Adelaide is all about. It's about looking back and reliving the past, but also about heading back into the city, and whether it's for a motor racing event or not, it might be to visit Gluttony or the Garden of Unearthly Delights as part of the Fringe Festival, Pedal Pre in Victoria Park, Cheese Fest, Light Up 2022, the New Year's Eve celebrations coming up in Rymel Park. The list goes on. It's about being able to go back into the city and relive Adelaide. It's about enjoying that part of the city, and while you're there, just taking a few moments to remember that you're in the precinct of one of the world's greatest motor racing street circuits. So when I started this project, motor racing on the Adelaide street circuit was non-existent. Then the change of government came in March, and here we are less than 12 months later, and the first of the motor racing events have already been and gone. Kicking things off was the Adelaide Rally event finale in Victoria Park, a few days prior to the Valo Adelaide 500. Following the Adelaide Rally component in Victoria Park, there was a teaser of what to expect at next year's Adelaide Motorsport Festival, which included track action with some Formula One cars. A very large turnout of fans rocked up to the free event, but with the schedule running extremely behind time, over 2 hours, a lot of people had left before the F1 cars had hit the track. In this podcast, we'll be having a chat about this, about the Valo Adelaide 500, and also next year's Adelaide Motorsport Festival. Before we head into the city, I just want to hand out a couple of virtual bouquets. So the first ones go to, well, you and all of my guests this year. Hopefully you stick around until the end of the podcast, but if you need to rush off or you missed the sign-off at the end, I just want to say thank you to everyone this year for listening via Acast and YouTube and interacting on both the Relive Adelaide YouTube channel and Facebook channels. I hope everybody has a safe and happy Christmas and a great start to 2023. Speaking of which, don't forget, like I mentioned before, Light Up 2022. That's the big New Year's Eve celebration in Rymel Park. It's all the good stuff with a drone and fireworks show also at 9 p.m. and then a big fireworks show again at midnight. It's a free ticketed event, and that's due to it being a limited capacity event. So ticket holders will be able to get in before 8 p.m. And then after 8, it's open to the public up to that capacity limit. So don't miss out. You can grab your tickets now online via MoshTix. I'll also put a link to that below. The second bouquet goes to the Stag Hotel, or the Stag Public House, an iconic piece of the Adelaide street circuit landscapes. Thanks for jumping on board and allowing us to record some of those podcasts on the balcony. And third, well, you're just going to have to listen on because that'll be coming up later in the podcast. I've got lots of what I think will be interesting content planned for the new year, including videos for the YouTube channel, and I've also uncovered a few hidden gems around the circuit, which I look forward to sharing with you, and I hope you all join me again in the new year to listen and to share in something that I love and enjoy covering, the Adelaide street circuit. So let's get into the city and catch up with Adrian. The city in Rymel Park, just opposite the lake. I'm here again with Adrian. Adrian, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Can you believe it's nearly the end of December and the Adelaide 500's come and gone?
Yeah, it's this year's really flown, and obviously it's been a big year. You know, motorsport's returned, Adelaide 500's back, Adelaide Motorsport Festival's coming back. So it's sort of it's a blow, especially when you think of where we were this time last year.
And where we're sitting here in Rymel Park, they'll be setting up in the new year for Fringe. So another good thing I found with the Adelaide 500 is because it wasn't competing with the Fringe, you know, now we had the Adelaide Rally event finale a few days before the Adelaide 500. The Adelaide 500 will have Fringe, then we'll have the Adelaide Motorsport Festival in March. Adelaide is only a small town, so it's good that those events aren't competing against each other.
Yeah, it was definitely noticeable, this Adelaide 500, that it was really the main event in the city. And it was sort of drawing people in, and you didn't have that sort of side distraction. So it was really good, and definitely that's something I noticed. The interstate sort of people who I sort of spoke to, they sort of noticed it and really made a comment about it, that it felt like they were part of the major event in the city, which is what you want it to be.
Yeah. We're just going to discuss the Adelaide Rally event finale, which, like I said, was a few days before the Adelaide 500. We'll just have a little breakdown of the Adelaide 500, just some of the things from that, and then also talk about the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, which will be happening next year in March. So the Adelaide Rally event finale was held in Victoria Park, and I think maybe to say more people rocked up than was expected would be a little bit of an understatement.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was the real point where I realised that it was all back, and that the appetite for motorsport was still there, because thousands of people turning up to a free event, and 4 days before the Adelaide 500. I'm sure a lot of them had tickets to the Adelaide 500, so in a sense it was probably people doubling up. So it was really well attended, and just shows that appetite and that demand for motorsport. And it was a great way, I think, for people just to see the circuit back and sort of get a taste of what it was going to be. And I'm sure for the Adelaide 500, it was great for them, because it's like, people getting a free preview of what, they could potentially be paying for the weekend after.
Yeah. So what happened is, I think everything was supposed to start up at about 3 o'clock, and then the F1 cars were going to come out. Me and my wife had to leave at about 5:30, just because we had some other commitments. And I think the F1 cars didn't come out till about 6:30. It looked like the Adelaide Rally, and one of the things which I didn't realise at the time, but in hindsight sort of it did make sense, is the Adelaide Rally and the Adelaide Motorsport Festival weren't necessarily combining for the day. It was Adelaide Rally first, and then the Adelaide Motorsport Festival activities. This might sound a little bit rude, was like tacked on, like to the end, like of it, but it was get the Adelaide Rally out the way, and then the Adelaide Motorsport Festival stuff would follow. But because the Adelaide Rally obviously ran overtime.
Yeah, it was a bit of a delay, which was unfortunate, but I think it was a bit of a cross-promotion between the two, and a sort of chance for all three events to come together when you think of the Adelaide 500 circuit the weekend before, the Adelaide Rally, the final stage, and then a sort of preview, a teaser, if you like, of the Adelaide Motorsport Festival. So, the delay was unfortunate, but it just sort of, they ran in the end, and as I said, it was more people than I thought, which was really good. And then we sort of saw that carry over into that Adelaide 500 weekend.
Yeah. Where they had the grandstand bunted off, I think, if the grandstand's 10,000 seats, there may have been an allocation of 1,000 seats in the grandstand, which would have been able to hear the PA system and everything they had set up. But as people were piling into that grandstand, there would have probably been, I'm guessing, about 4,000 people just sitting in the grandstand. And then obviously as people got further away from that DJ/announcements area, they couldn't hear, and all of that.
Yeah, definitely. I was amazed at how many people turned up, and that just shows, as I said, that motorsport's back, and there is that demand, because I sort of assumed that everyone was sort of going to wait out for the Adelaide 500. So it was great to see back-to-back events, and then we roll into March, and there's the Motorsport Festival. So like we said before, we've gone from nothing to three major events, which is pretty cool.
Yep. And Craig Lowndes was in the pits. I could see him, with his big smile floating around the F1 car, which he was about to drive later in the afternoon. On Facebook, I think the Adelaide Motorsport Festival said he will be attending the Adelaide Motorsport Festival next year. Yeah.
I believe he'll be back, and I think he's sort of one of the drivers that sort of, lined up to drive one of those classic F1 cars. So, he loves it, and he has that open wheel experience, and obviously he's a big Australian motorsport legend, so it's great to see him there supporting those events. Yeah,
and Craig Lowndes is always good to have at events, because he always has time to have photos taken or autographs, and he's very fan friendly. So yeah, fantastic. Craig Lowndes will be at the Adelaide Motorsport Festival in March of 2023. Moving on to the Adelaide 500, it came and went pretty quick. What did you think?
It was good. It was, I had my fears like everyone else that it was all too late in the day, and, would it be, ready, and, will it be well attended? But I think, it went off without a hitch, really. Little helped things, but I don't think you can sort of blame anyone as to be expected. I think there was only one criticism, which was we'll probably get onto later, but that wasn't something that the race organisers had much control over. But no, it went really well, and it felt like an Adelaide 500. It had that feel. It didn't feel any different. I think there were big improvements in terms of, you know, the crowd and sort of the amenities open to them. So credit to the organisers. I'm amazed they pulled it off, and you know, it worked, and that's what you want.
I guess that's one of the things, you know, that we need to remember is the election was in March. I don't think the Motorsport Board was formally brought in until maybe May, so it was all happened really, really quick, and I'm sure they were penciling stuff in and doing as much as they could before everything was announced. But yeah, they did a great job to squeeze it into such a short time frame.
Yeah, I was one of those people who thought they should wait till 23 and just do it properly, but in hindsight they clearly had enough ready to go, and I think obviously this allows then improvements for 23 and sort of some things. But you know, they had the big concert act, they had the good support categories, they sort of had some star names, they had different things off track, so that's what you want. It all seemed to work, and the crowd seemed to justify all that. Yeah,
and one of the things after the race, after Shane Van Gisbergen did his huge, you know, burnout on pit straight, and you know whether he pulled up the bitumen or not, I'm not too sure. But yeah, after he done that huge burnout, we hustled out of the grandstand just to get over the other side near the pit building. And as I was about to walk up and go over the overpass, they said, you know, and presenting such and such trophy is the Honourable Peter Malinauskas, and I nearly fell over because everybody, there's just a huge roar, and usually when politicians hand out a trophy, 9 times out of 10 usually get a boo.
Yeah, it's amazing how this event has really become his, and you know, obviously we know the election, how that went, and he really sort of championed the whole thing, so you know, he probably had more at stake than anyone else, and so credit to him for coming up with it. You know, I think it seems to be he was the one who was pushing for the 22 sort of date, where it would have been very easy to just settle for 23. So it seemed to work, and you know, people love him for it, and I think, you know, he just, you know, now that the race needs to stand up on its own 2 feet, so then, you know, whether he's there or not doesn't really matter, but he seems to be the champion of the event, and you know, I think people are aware that if it wasn't for him, we probably wouldn't have had it back.
Correct, yeah. Crowd numbers, 258,200 was the estimated crowd over the 4 days. Do we know why it's estimated and not an actual figure?
I think just the time pressure of announcing it as soon as they do, and obviously with the concerts there's people who come in sort of later in the day and things, but it felt about right. It didn't feel like an exaggeration, or it didn't feel understated. It felt like that, certainly compared to previous Adelaide 500s, and you know, there were definitely, you know, a lot of people around, especially for the concert at the end, so it sort of, I think that's what they were aiming for, and they got it. And you know, the weather was really good. They sort of got lucky with that. It was sort of probably the first few hot days we've had this summer, so that worked out well. And lots of rain in and around it, but you know, it avoided the weekend, so they were pretty blessed in that sense.
Yeah, I think Bathurst just fell short of hitting the 200,000, but the weather, I mean, you had people in the camping area digging trenches so they could, you know, flow water around where their campsite was. So, you know, the weather wasn't the best for Bathurst. But was the Adelaide 500 the largest attended event for supercars this year?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's always going to be a comparative figure with Bathurst. I think obviously, obviously Albert Park would have had more because that technically counts as a supercars round, but obviously we know why people are there. But no, I think that's a good sign. Obviously Bathurst was a bit of a washout this year, but I think if it can hold that 250 mark, you know, maybe creep up to 300 might be, you know, a bit of a stretch, but I think it depends on the concert. You know, really, I think you're going to have that core people who turn up every to watch the motorsport, but it's that concert that's going to tip things over the edge. It's, you know, I knew a few people who came in just for the concert, so it'll depend each year, you know, who they get.
One of the things that they didn't advertise being as part of your purchase of buying a ticket was the opportunity to get a free suntan. So I would just like to put a little bouquet out to the St. John's tents, because in all of those St. John's tents they were giving away free sunscreen. But yeah, it was absolutely hot on the weekend. I don't think we've had a summer weekend like that, or multiple summer days, for quite some time.
Yeah, it felt like the first sort of proper bit of summer which coincided with the event, which was good in that sense because you don't want it to sort of be a washout like we've had before. So they definitely got lucky in that sense. I think that was the biggest fear going in, given the sort of wet weather we've had. So, and obviously, when it's the first sort of bout of heat, then that sort of brings with it its own challenges. But they seem to accommodate well. That's what impressed me most. It felt like the organisers really went above and beyond to try and improve the fan experience with what was around, and that was definitely noticeable compared to the previous 2020.
One of the other things they had, I'm pretty sure it was sponsored by SA Water, but they had like mobile little trailers where you could fill up your drink bottle and all that sort of stuff. So all of that comes in. And I don't know whether it was a last-minute thing, but I did see some of those mist fans pop up. So, they obviously had the fans in mind, but, when you're pushing 40 degrees, you can't really control that, so you've just got to make the most of it and do the best you can.
And it's a big open space too, and people are limited in terms of what areas they can go to and things, but no, I think they did well. It seemed like people were sort of comfortable and, easy to get around and things. So, again, it felt like the event never went away, in a sense, which is what you want.
Yeah. Talking about the fan experience, I had a lot of hands-on displays as well, which I like. The Australian Defence Force was there, where you could pick up, a rocket launch and see what it's like to hold one of those. I think they had a 50 cal rifle on the ground where you could lay down and pretend you're unloading that. Repco were there. They had a good stand. And I know that you like your cycling. They actually had a Bathurst track set up, a Scalextrics one. And the way it worked is you and a friend, you jump on an exercise bike, and whoever pedals the fastest, obviously their car on the track goes fast, and you see who wins. The Ampol amplifier, they had a simulator style thing set up where you could drive a little remote control car around the track, which had a camera on the top. It's always good when you go somewhere and they have displays, and it's not just like you're standing behind a bit of bunting and you can't touch anything. There was a lot of hands-on stuff, a lot of stuff to do, and I guess as well, if you're taking your family along, for those who don't necessarily want to sit and watch the motorsport, there's a lot for them to do as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that next year will be probably even better, because they'll have just more time. And with a lot of those things, it takes people a while to set that stuff up and organise it and get sort of over to Adelaide and set it up and do all that. So the fact that they had as much as they did was pretty impressive, and I expect that to sort of step up even more next year.
Yeah. And I remember in one of our previous podcasts, you talked about the heritage-listed Victoria Park grandstand being a bit of a haven where people go, go and relax in. I'm sure they did it on purpose, but right in front of that Victoria Park grandstand, you had the BMX jumps and everything set up, and the amount of people which sat in that grandstand, great view, over the area. You could watch the BMX, you could see everything else all set up. A lot better having the concert area back to where it was, and obviously the the activation zone set up in front of the grandstand. Yeah,
that was a big thing, and I don't think it's sort of officially discussed, but I think one of the reasons they moved it over was just to get further away from the fringe. Because if you think of the fringe, and then if you have the concert and CBC Oval, it's a bit of a crossover in terms of you've got shows across the road. So I think that one of the reasons was not just cost. I think there was sort of, some logistical issues with, CBC and, councils and all that, but just to move the footprint of the concert further away from the fringe. So that was one of the things. Without the fringe, then it didn't matter that it was on CBC Oval as much. It's because, there's nothing on across the road. So, that was another important thing, that it felt like, how it was. Yeah. And how it worked and why it worked is for that reason. So you don't want to screw that around. And then that allowed Victoria Park to get back to that sort of activation-y sort of section like you have, and use that grandstand as a bit of a, point where people can just go and hang out and just sit but have something to watch.
Well, speaking of concerts, did you check out any of the acts that came along?
Yes, I went along on the Sunday night, which was good, and it seemed definitely well attended, and definitely a lot of people. Well, I knew people who came in just for the concert, so sort of that's one of the main reasons they do it, just to get sort of more numbers and people who aren't going to go to a motorsport event. So it seemed to work. It was definitely a big name which attracted people, and I think that was really important. I was sort of, when they announced the concert, or sort of the comeback for 2022, I thought that's not leaving much time for a big international act, but the fact that they pulled one over the line was really good, and it definitely worked in terms of getting that extra sort of crowd in.
We went over and got a seat early because I wanted to see something for Kate on the Sunday night, and then that Amy Shark after, and then the Killers came out later. was the first time I'd actually gone to a concert at the Adelaide 500. Do they usually have those big breaks, like in between the acts, or?
Yep, just to sort of change up the stage and do all that. And I think just to sort of elongate the night a bit, give people a chance to get drinks and things. And I think they, have to finish by a certain time. But obviously there's, an hour set per act. So they're a bit limited on, obviously can only start, when the last race finishes. So it all works. And then it's sort of what it does as well is it staggers the amount of people leaving.
That's true.
So you sort of have, and this was an old Grand Prix thing. They didn't want that big exodus out of the city because they knew just the public transport system couldn't cope. So by having something else there, you have people who either stay or go, people coming in. So it's all sort of staggered. I'm sure there would have been people who left after, maybe wanted to see one of the early bands and then left, or people coming in for the Killers. So that seems to work really well, and I thought that was sort of done well, and, it was very well advertised in terms of, what session, what times people were on, how long they were going to go for, and you knew when you were going to be out, which was good.
Yeah. So we got there, watched something for Kate. That was really good. So focused on the stage. When I got up and turned around, I could not believe how many...
Yeah.
Where did all these people come from? There were so many people there, and it was... Having said that, it wasn't like you were packed in like sardines. You could still, move around, have a bit of a dance if you wanted. But yeah, there were so many people there. It was, big crowd.
Definitely, and it felt sort of, I remember when I got there, it was sort of packed out already. So it just grew and grew, and sort of, it's funny, like, the concerts going back to that oval, it's just big enough when you think of it.
Yeah.
So there's only so much area they can go to, but that's just the, limited area of a, Adelaide Motorsport Park.
So, Robbie, the Killers were the headline act for this year in 2022. Next year, we'll be seeing Robbie Williams, who always puts on a great show. Just got me thinking, back to the Adelaide Grand Prix days, who were some of the big acts that they had during the Grand Prix?
So they had Tina Turner, Cher, Bon Jovi, Paul Simon, Crowded House. So sort of big names. Definitely towards the end, in the sort of the more 90s was when they really ramped up the international acts. So Bon Jovi was the last in 95. But sort of, there were some years when they didn't have that big headline act, and then other years they did. So it was a bit sort of up and down, but definitely, I think by the end it was sort of expected to be big international. Bon Jovi at 95 is sort of at their peak. So it definitely worked, and that the Adelaide 500 then carried that in. Yeah.
Did Ayrton Senna get up and dance with Tina Turner?
Yes, 93. Yep. And really that was his sort of last sighting in Adelaide when you think of it, because that was his last win and last sort of race here. So that Tina Turner concert was probably one of the more memorable ones. Cher performed in 1990 and wasn't that well received, so they were a bit hit and miss. The Paul Simon one was in 91 when the race was shortened and sort of was a bit of a rain-soaked day, but no, it was sort of a tradition that sort of kept going and sort of grew as the Grand Prix went on.
Yeah. Who do you think might be complimenting Robbie Williams next year if you were thinking bands, or who would you like to see as far as bands go?
I think they'll keep that template of the one big international act and then have local bands sort of fill out the rest. So I'd expect to see something similar to what we've seen this year, and more probably go back to how we saw it in terms of more sort of theme nights. So Saturday night was your sort of more Triple M, could you say, like your Jimmy Barnes sort of Ice House sort of thing. Friday night maybe is more of a younger demographic, a younger sort of maybe more of a Nova crowd. It'd be interesting to see if they bring back Thursday concerts, because that didn't happen this year. So they've left themselves scope for growth and improvement, but I'd expect to see just one big international act. I think it's probably asking a lot to have more than one, because I definitely know, like, for example, with us working in the media, we only got to the concert by the sort of halfway through Amy Shark, which was the sort of second to last band. So if you had two major acts, you'd have to really go further into the night, which I'm not sure they're wanting to do or allowed to do. So I'd say that's probably it. And, obviously they announced it right away, which is good, because then they can get sort of that sort of, the ticket sales can sort of really start up straight away. So I'd expect to see similar sort of bands, and I think it'll be more Australian focused.
So next year, 2023 at Robbie Williams. And also just quickly on that finish time as well, I guess, it is also a Sunday night, so those who need to work the next day can still get home, before midnight, have a relatively early night. And those who do want to party on, having said that, I haven't been out in quite some time. I'm sure there's places in town which are open past midnight on a Sunday, so, is there?
Yes, I actually went out with a friend after, and we went to some places, and it was mostly teams and other media and drivers and things I saw out. It wasn't many locals, actually, so I think that's just typical of Adelaide on a Sunday night, to be honest. I think, I left the concert at the same time as everyone else, and everyone seemed to be heading home. So I was probably one of the few who stayed out. So, but yeah, definitely, I went to a few places, and it was just people I recognised from supercars. So that was pretty telling.
Yeah, and they also had the gala dinner was it on the Monday night?
Yes, at Adelaide Oval. Yep. Yeah. And again, it's more reason for people to stay. Extra bed nights for sort of this, core supercars group. So that's, another benefit of the season finale is it sort of adds that extra sort of night to the sort of thing and the event. And so it's, great for the government because then it sort of increases the bed stays.
Yeah. And the Adelaide 500 also won the fan favourite event for 2022.
Yeah, surprisingly.
Which is not surprising at all. But having said that, it was a great event.
Yep.
So it will be interesting. I'm hoping to talk to a few other people involved in supercars, hopefully involved in supercars as, they do their own podcasts on supercars, and just to get, their insights as to how Adelaide compares to other rounds, what Adelaide does better. So we'll just see how that goes. That's just an idea for the new year. Cool. Improvements, obviously shade is being one of them, but I did see a couple of comments pop up on Facebook, and I think you've mentioned it before, but during the Grand Prix there wasn't any shade on the main grandstand. And
not significant. I mean, towards the end there was a bit of shade, but not that covered the majority thing. It was actually more of a more recent thing than we realised. So those sort of big coloured shade things came in a few years later, so I'd expect to see them back. I think that's the one big noticeable sort of absence, but obviously we all know that a lot of the infrastructure was sold off, so it was a case of get by with what you have and go from there. So I think I'd expect to see that back, and I think that would be the next logical step, especially November, December, you're always going to get a bit of heat and that start of summer, so I expect to see that back from next year.
Yeah. A few other improvements or things they might add in. I think, I don't know whether I would get out there on a bike. No, I probably would. If they did maybe on the Wednesday afternoon, is bring your bike to Victoria Park and you can go for a ride around the circuit. I think that might be something for them to look at, hopefully.
At the 2021, I did a run.
That's right, I remember you saying, yeah.
On the Wednesday, Thursday, I can't remember, running 2 laps of the track, and so I didn't see that again. There was cycling previously, the Grand Prix. They did a track drive day on the Wednesday this year, which was something I hadn't seen before, so people, if they wanted to cut laps of the track in their own cars could do that. So there was new initiatives, but I think that's going to be one of those things like I was saying from next year. I think they'll step it up and it gives them more scope to reintroduce some of those things, which I'm guessing they just ran out of time, or just, the priority was just to put on the event, and that other stuff, the bonus stuff, which could attract a few other people, is sort of the stuff they'll start reintroducing from next year.
Yeah. I don't mean to keep bringing up this old chestnut, but a permanent pit facility. I don't know if it's one of those things, because it's one of the things I would like to see, but I do honestly think I'm seeing it more and more in the comments section of, the Save the Adelaide 500 or the Bring Back the Adelaide 500 page, the actual Adelaide 500 page. A lot of people commenting saying, just build it, just put in a permanent facility, stop putting it up, stop putting it down. It takes 80 days to build. We're nearly at the end of December. It's still there now. I'm guessing it'll take another 80 days to bring it down. Is the time changing, or you still have you changed what you're betting on, or you don't think it'll happen?
I don't think it'll happen. knowing the history with the Grand Prix especially, I think if it ever was going to be done, it should have been then. I know the politics, I know the issues around the parklands and, what would have to happen for it to happen. I just can't see it happening. It needs to happen. It makes total sense. When you look at the Adelaide 500, obviously sort of, I work in it, so obviously I sort of want to see it succeed, but the cost of putting it up and then for 4 days and then taking it down, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so I just don't understand how that's sustainable long term. The event really needs to flourish to justify that. And, permanent facility makes sense. You've seen it. We've seen it in Melbourne. You could take that template and just copy it. But obviously there's a lot of political reasons why it probably won't happen. I just don't see it.
Yeah. If you're looking for a pit building, you can't exactly pop down to, Pit Buildings or us and buy one. Where does the pit building come from then, the temporary one?
Basically, it's theirs. It's sort of the original one that didn't sell. So it sort of goes back, gets dismantled, goes back in storage for 9 months and then gets rebuilt. And then it's just a whole process. And, like we said, it's months that it takes to put up and take down. And then it just sits in storage. So... it makes sense to have something permanent there, but just knowing the politics of it all, I can't see it.
Yeah. And then where they had the pit building set up, there was like a sort of gap, a little sort of corporate marquee, and then you had the pit exit building. Was that on hire from the Melbourne Grand Prix?
Yep, some of it was from Melbourne, which I think will be a sort of arrangement that they have, that they sort of lease it, which, again, because of the sell-off, they didn't have all the available infrastructure that they had in 2020, so they had to either start again or hire what they could or sort of borrow it. So I think that there will be those sort of temporary arrangements, and that's the nature of a temporary thing. You can't really justify these big extravagant sort of structures that you're just going to take down and put in storage, so it makes sense to lease them. And that's where the timing works well. Another advantage of the end of season thing, because obviously it's sort of a few months away from the Grand Prix.
Yeah. And obviously we don't know what the commercial arrangement was as far as hiring fees go, but just on the basics, it is actually nice that Melbourne said, yeah, sure, you guys can borrow it, because really they could have turned around and said, well, sorry, no.
Yeah, I think that's another reason the move works, is because previously when they were so close together, there was that element of competition. But now that they're sort of different time of year, different events, they're more likely to work together. So I think we'll see a bit more of that in the future.
Yeah. Well, Melbourne might have taken our Formula One Grand Prix, but we do say thank you. Thank you for lending us the pit exit building. The track map is also out. So when I went to the Adelaide 500, I went there Thursday morning, first thing, and I don't know if you remember the old Toys R Us in Rundle Mall, the big 2-story Toys R Us. That's what it felt like to me. Took me back to those days when you were a kid and you said, oh, do you want to go into the Toys R Us? And you beauty, walk through the door and you're running around like a chicken with its head chopped off. When I rocked up to the Adelaide 500, I was so excited. I was off everywhere looking at everything. I took over 500 photos in 2 days. So one of the things I'm going to do, only because the track map, as far as the grandstand setup goes, it all looks the same that it's going to be for next year. So I've taken a ton of photos and I'll be putting those up on the YouTube channel, just to show people what some of the viewing areas are like, because I'm pretty sure I went into every grandstand and took pictures of what it looks like from every grandstand. Went to all of the general admission spots, and I think if you've got the money and you love motorsport, go for the grandstand ticket, but don't feel like if you're buying a general admission ticket that you're losing out, because you're not, because those general admission areas, as far as the viewing goes, and similar access. Obviously, a few of the places you can't go, but nothing wrong with general admission.
No, especially that they've seemed to put a lot of thought into sort of what the fans want, and there was a few more things that I noticed sort of that you could sort of, go hang out at, or, have a drink here, or sort of have a bite to eat there. So I think there was a renewed focus on that, which had probably been lost the last few years. So it was good to see, and it was good that they sort of, it wasn't distractions, it wasn't things that made no real sense, it made things that, just gave people another option to do. So credit to them. I think they listened. I think they listened and sort of took on board the advice and went from there.
Yeah. So track maps out. Looks like the same layout regarding grandstands, concert stage, activation zone, and the feature race, or the support categories. Paddocks 1 and 2 will be in the same spots, which is good. And keep your eye on the YouTube channel. I'll put a couple of videos up there just showing what the viewing areas are like in the general admission and also the grandstand areas. Also, tickets are available at adelaide500.com.au. So buy your tickets before the 31st of December 2022 to enjoy 2022. Ticket prices from January the 1st, they will be up to the 2023 prices. So get in early and enjoy those 2022 prices. Off of the Adelaide 500, on quickly just touching on the Adelaide Motorsport Festival. Don't really want to go into it too much because there hasn't really been that many more announcements since the last podcast. But one of the things that I didn't mention last podcast is I saw Zach Brown being interviewed at Bathurst, and that did get my mind ticking over because he's obviously heavily involved with McLaren. He also said that he still talks to Daniel Ricciardo. Now, Daniel Ricciardo is having a year off as reserve driver for Red Bull. I won't be putting on any money. I won't be putting on any money in Daniel Ricciardo coming. Not too sure on that one. But I think there's going to be a big McLaren influence. And other than that, I don't really know much more. So, yeah.
Yes, there was a bit of a teaser in the Adelaide 500 program and on the Adelaide 500 big screens. There are announcements coming sort of closer to the new year, and there'll be sort of cars and drivers announced. They have announced, the categories. So Formula One cars will be back. Indy cars and things. That there's some more open wheel categories and sort of some heritage touring cars and V8 supercars and things. And it's basically a bit of everything.
Yeah,
really.
While I was talking, I was just moving my phone and everything out the way just so we could have a quick look at the... and I'll put a picture up on the Facebook page as well. So Formula One in Adelaide, it's the Adelaide Motorsport Festival poster. I think in other years, though, they've actually put out multiple posters. So this might just be one of many which are coming out.
Possibly.
Yeah. Well, wait and see, because they are beautiful pictures. Now, looking here, there's a McLaren Formula One car with a number 7 on there. That helmet looks to be Mika Häkkinen. So Mika Häkkinen... He had a little bit of history with the Adelaide Grand Prix, but so maybe for the wrong reasons for one of them, because he had a huge accident here, didn't he, before he was double world champion? Yeah,
in '95, the last race, he had a big crash and fractured his skull and sort of required emergency sort of medical treatment and things. And he was actually here in Adelaide for a few weeks after that, sort of in a coma, and he couldn't fly back. And so he has that Adelaide connection. He then came back a year or so later and helped open a helipad, the Royal Adelaide, where he sort of stayed. So I think he has that sort of Adelaide connection. And obviously sort of he went on to become a 2-time world champion. And I think, he'd be the first to say he'd probably be very thankful for Adelaide and the treatment he received, because it could have been a very different outcome.
Absolutely. But, obviously Mika Häkkinen, went on to great things, but, during the Adelaide Grand Prix days, it was his early days in Formula One, wasn't it? Yeah,
he actually raced here a fair bit, though. He was sort of with Lotus from 91, and then he went to McLaren 93, so he raced in, a few Adelaide races. Obviously, he was sort of one of those up-and-coming drivers at the time in Adelaide, sort of like alongside the Michael Schumachers and that, and then a few years later, obviously, he was fighting Schumacher for championship, so... I think, obviously it's sort of McLaren's 60th anniversary, and I think that's sort of something that's going to be really at the core of the festival and the celebrations around that.
Yeah. So, and it takes me back to what Tim said at the start of this year. He said there'll be, hopefully, Formula One drivers which have a connection to Adelaide. And ever since he said that, for some reason, Mika Häkkinen popped into my head. I've now seen Mika Häkkinen on the poster. So I might be barking up the wrong tree, but I'll be slapping $20 and a bottle of red or white wine, whichever you would like, on Mika Häkkinen coming. I'm not saying that he is, but that's just my gut feeling. I could be wrong.
Well, I think the timing with the Adelaide Motorsport Festival the week before the Australian Grand Prix is key, and I think that's sort of a very smart move, because it just opens that door. And if you think of all the Formula One personnel who used to drive in Adelaide and are still involved in Formula One now, who are having to come to Australia for the week after, it makes sense to come a week weekend before when there is no other race, and they could sort of get here early and be part of that celebration. So I think that timing is really the key point, and I'm sure there's going to be some announcements around that heading towards March.
Yep. So March 25th and 26th of next year, and with Christmas and New Year's Eve coming up, I'm sure there'll be some little presents posted onto the Adelaide Motorsport Festival Facebook page. Some teasers, maybe drivers, cars, etc. So jump on Facebook, check out Adelaide Motorsport Festival. That's March 25th and 26th. I do just want to quickly touch on the ticket prices as well. So if you want to go in for a single day adult tickets, that's for people 17 and over, $60, or children 5 to 16 inclusive is $20, so that's for a single day, or for your weekend, Saturday and Sunday pass, just double it, $40 for a child, $120 for an adult. That's pretty reasonable, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the point is, like the Adelaide 500, it's not just about the motorsport. There's going to be other stuff, and it's sort of a full-day thing. It's a full-day experience. And I think the beauty of the Motorsport Festival is, obviously with the Adelaide 500, you're limited in terms of the amount of categories, but with the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, I think it's 17 categories. Yeah. So, it's sort of goes from everything from Formula One cars to, time attack cars to drift cars to rally cars to electric cars, so there's a bit of everything for everyone. Motorbikes even. So, I think that's the sort of beauty of it. It sort of appeals to a sort of different audience too.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the differing things is, with the Adelaide 500, both great events, but with the Adelaide 500, you might have supercars come out for their qualifying session, and then you'll have a bit of a break, and then you'll have another support category, whereas Adelaide Motorsport Festival, it's keep your eyes on the track because, now a Formula One car's coming out, that'll go in, and then you'll have straight after something else going out for 3 laps, and it's just that constant bombardment of motorsport, which is great.
Yeah, and like we were saying earlier, it really utilises that Adelaide 500, Adelaide Victoria Park sort of section, so, it's sort of more like a sort of picnic in the sort of park sort of setting, so you can really sort of lay back, and it's not as pressured to sit in a grandstand for sort of, hours on end. You can really sort of move around and sort of almost like a sort of fringe setup, if you like, where you can sort of go in and make of it what you want.
Yeah. So I think that'll about wrap things up for today. So, Adrian, just want to obviously wish you a very Merry Christmas, and thanks for everything that you've done for the podcast. It's great having you on, not only to give those insights about the Adelaide Grand Prix, but also about motorsport in general. So, yeah, thanks, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas.
No, likewise, and it's been great, and we'll see you in the new year.
Yep. I'd just like to obviously thank everybody for listening, for jumping on the YouTube channel and Facebook page, throwing likes and comments in there. Hope everybody has a safe and happy Christmas, and look forward to you all joining me again next year in 2023. Adrian, see you next year, and as always, keep smiling.
Thank you.
And bye for now.